My father's funeral was supposed to be the day I buried him. Instead, it was the day a stranger walked in with a child and exposed my husband's secret. The moment she said, "I'm his father," I felt the air leave the room, and my husband went completely pale. I'm glad you're here. Truly. Because this isn't a story I ever planned to tell. And once I start, there's no gentle way through it. What happened that morning didn't just shatter my marriage. It forced me to look back at my entire life and realize how much had been hidden from me. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. Now let me take you back. It was a gray Tuesday morning in early October, the kind of cold that settles into your bones without warning. The funeral home sat on the edge of town, quiet and modest, with a small American flag hanging limp near the entrance. I arrived early, dressed in black, holding a folded program in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept moving when my father had stopped. My name is Emily Carter, and that day, I was 34 years old. I had been married to Daniel for 7 years. Standing beside me as I walked through those doors, he looked like the supportive husband everyone expected him to be. One hand at my back, the other holding mine, his face composed and respectful. People told me later how strong he seemed, how devoted. At the time, I believed them. The room smelled faintly of lilies and old carpet cleaner. Soft music played, something instrumental and forgettable. My father's casket rested at the front, closed, polished, final. Friends, co-workers, distant relatives were already seated, whispering condolences, nodding politely. Everything felt rehearsed, like a script everyone knew except me. Daniel leaned down and whispered that he'd step outside for a moment to take a call. I barely noticed. I was too focused on keeping myself upright. The service had just begun when the door at the back of the room opened. At first, no one paid attention. Late arrivals happen at funerals. But then I saw her. She was young, younger than me, maybe late 20s, wearing a dark blue coat that didn't quite fit the setting. She held the hand of a little boy, no older than 5. He had dark hair, neatly combed, and wide eyes that scanned the room with a confusion that made my chest tighten. They didn't sit down. They stood there, just inside the doorway, as if waiting for permission to exist. That's when I looked for Daniel. He was frozen halfway down the aisle, his phone hanging uselessly at his side. His face had gone white, not pale, not shocked. White, like all the blood had drained out of him in an instant. I'd never seen that expression on him before. Not when my father got sick. Not when we argued. Not ever. The woman's eyes locked onto his. The room felt smaller, quieter, like it was holding its breath. She took a step forward, her voice steady but loud enough to carry. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but this concerns him." Then she gestured toward my husband. And before anyone could stop her, before I could even form a thought, she added words that still echo in my head. "He's the father of my child." Every sound disappeared after that. And standing there, between my father's casket and my husband's silence, I realized this funeral was no longer about the man I had lost. It was about the truth I was about to find. Before that morning, before the funeral and the woman and the child, my life felt ordinary. Not perfect, not cinematic, just steady. The kind of life you build quietly and assume will always hold. Daniel and I lived in a 2-story house in a quiet New Jersey suburb, the kind of neighborhood where people waved but rarely stopped to talk. Our days followed a predictable rhythm. He worked in logistics for a regional shipping company, long hours but decent pay. I worked as a project coordinator for a healthcare nonprofit, mostly from home since the pandemic. We had no children yet, something we talked about in the vague, future tense way couples do when they believe time is on their side. Mornings were coffee and silence. Evenings were dinner and light conversation. What happened at work, what needed fixing in the house, what we might do on the weekend. It wasn't passionate, but it was comfortable. Safe. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Daniel was the kind of man people trusted easily. Calm voice, measured reactions. He listened more than he spoke. When my friends met him, they'd tell me how lucky I was. He seemed solid, they'd say, like nothing rattles him. I believed that too. My father, Richard Carter, liked Daniel from the beginning. That mattered more to me than I ever admitted. My dad had been skeptical of every man I'd dated before, always finding something wrong, some quiet concern he never fully explained. But with Daniel, he relaxed. He even defended him during one particularly ugly argument we had early in our marriage, telling me, "That man isn't perfect, Emily, but he's not careless. There's a difference." I held on to that sentence for years. My father and I had been close in a complicated way. He raised me alone after my mother died when I was 12. He wasn't warm, but he was present, reliable. He believed in keeping things to yourself, handling problems privately, not making scenes. Growing up, I learned that love didn't always come with explanations. Sometimes it came in silence. When my father got sick, everything narrowed. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. No long timeline, no hopeful language. Just appointments, medications, and the quiet understanding that we were counting down. Daniel came with me to every major appointment. He drove when I couldn't. He held my hand in waiting rooms. He never complained, never pulled away. If anything, he became more attentive, more careful. Looking back, I see how deliberate that was, but at the time, it felt like support. The night before my father died, Daniel stayed up with me on the couch. We didn't talk much. He just sat there, his arm around my shoulders, steady as a wall. When my phone rang at 2:17 a.m., he answered it for me because I couldn't make my hands work. Afterward, when everything went quiet, he said something I didn't think twice about then. He trusted me, Daniel said softly. Your dad. He trusted me with you. I nodded, buried my face into his chest, and let myself believe that meant something good. The funeral was scheduled quickly. My father hated delays, hated fuss. He had planned most of it himself years earlier, down to the music and the reading. Daniel handled the logistics with a competence that impressed everyone. I remember a distant aunt telling me, "You married well, honey." What no one knew, what I didn't know, was that beneath all that order, something had already fractured. There were small things, moments that didn't fit but didn't scream either. Daniel had started taking phone calls outside more often. He guarded his phone in a way he never used to. When I asked casually who he was talking to, he'd say work. Always work. I didn't push. Grief makes you generous with excuses. Once, about 2 weeks before my father died, I found a tiny sneaker in the trunk of Daniel's car. Blue, child-sized, clean. He laughed when I showed it to him. Must have belonged to one of my coworkers' kids, he said easily. They carpool sometimes. It made no sense, but I let it go, because the life I thought I had depended on not asking the wrong questions. And as I stood in that funeral home, watching a stranger point at my husband with a child at her side, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a secret that had just arrived. It was one that had been waiting for me to notice. After the woman spoke, the room didn't erupt the way you'd expect. There was no shouting, no gasps loud enough to break the silence. Instead, everything slowed. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. The soft music kept playing, absurdly cheerful in the background, like it hadn't realized something was wrong. I remember thinking, this can't be happening here. Not in front of my father's casket. Not with his name printed neatly on the program in my hands. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at the woman like she had reached into his chest and grabbed something vital. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His jaw tightened. If I hadn't been watching him so closely, I might have missed the way his hand trembled. I waited for him to deny it. I waited for him to laugh it off, to say she was confused, or cruel, or mistaken. Anything. But he didn't. And that was the first crack. The funeral director stepped forward, whispering urgently, trying to redirect the woman, suggesting they talk outside. She nodded, calm, almost polite. The little boy clutched her coat tighter, sensing tension he didn't understand. Daniel finally moved, not toward me, but toward them. Emily, he said quietly, not looking at me. We should talk. That was it. No explanation. No reassurance. Just we should talk. I followed them out into the hallway, my legs heavy, my ears ringing. People watched us pass, curiosity already replacing sympathy in their eyes. I felt exposed, like my grief had become entertainment. In the hallway, the woman introduced herself as Rachel. Her voice was steady, practiced. This wasn't her first time saying these words. The boy's name was Lucas. He was 5 years old, almost 6. Daniel leaned against the wall, rubbing his face like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. Not here, he said. Please, not today. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to me. I didn't want to do this like this, she said. But your father asked me to come today. He said it was time. That sentence landed harder than anything else. My father asked her to come. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, not tears yet, something colder. You knew my dad? I asked. She nodded. He knew about Lucas, about Daniel. He didn't want me to stay hidden anymore. Daniel flinched at that. Actually flinched. I looked at my husband, searching his face for something familiar, something human. All I saw was fear. How long? I asked him. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. He swallowed. Before we were married. That was the second crack. Rachel didn't interrupt. She just stood there, letting him unravel at his own pace. 5 years, Daniel added. It was over before you and I got serious. I wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. And the child? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. His mine, Daniel said. 5 years old. I did the math automatically, cruelly. 5 years ago, Daniel and I had been newlyweds. Happy, planning trips, talking about the future. You said it was over, I whispered. It was, he insisted. Rachel and I, it was a mistake. One time, I didn't know about the pregnancy until later. Rachel shook her head slowly. That's not true. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Not now. But she kept going. He visited. Not all the time, but enough. He sent money. He told me he couldn't be public, that it would destroy his marriage. I felt something inside me give way. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes desperate. I was trying to protect you, he said. And your father, he understood. He said it was better this way. My father. Again. Every word felt like it was being placed carefully, like pieces of a story that had been rehearsed without me. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She didn't hand it to Daniel. She gave it to me. He wrote you a letter, she said. Your father. He asked me to give it to you after. My hands shook as I took it. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. Not there. Not with Daniel watching me like he was waiting for a verdict. All I knew, standing in that hallway between grief and betrayal, was this. The man I had trusted most in my life hadn't just kept a secret from me. He had helped hide it. And whatever was in that letter was about to change everything. I didn't go back into the funeral. I told the director I felt faint, that I needed air. No one questioned it. Grief gives you permission to disappear. Daniel stayed close, hovering, saying nothing, his presence suddenly unbearable. Rachel waited near the entrance, keeping Lucas occupied with her phone, giving me space I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. I drove home alone. The letter sat on the passenger seat the entire time, like it was watching me. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry. I just drove, hands locked on the steering wheel, trying not to think about the math, the lies, the way Daniel's voice had cracked when Rachel spoke. Once inside the house, I locked the door behind me and slid down against it. The quiet was overwhelming. This was the house where I had mourned my father, where Daniel had held me while telling me I wasn't alone. I opened the letter. Emily, it began, my father's familiar, careful handwriting. If you're reading this, then things have unfolded the way I feared they would. My chest tightened. He wrote that he'd known about Lucas for almost a year. Daniel had come to him one night, shaking, asking for advice. My father described how torn he'd been, how Daniel begged him not to tell me, swearing it would destroy me in the middle of my father's illness. I made a choice I will carry with me, my father wrote. I chose silence. He said he believed Daniel when he promised the affair was over, that the child would be provided for quietly, that my life would be protected. He framed it as an act of love, as shielding me from pain. I was wrong, the letter said simply, and I'm sorry. I read it twice, then a third time. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the certainty with which my father had decided what I could and couldn't handle. He hadn't trusted me with the truth. He had trusted my husband more. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. Instead, I went upstairs and opened his desk drawer. I wasn't looking for proof at first. I didn't want confirmation. But the moment I opened his laptop and typed in the password, the same one he'd used for years, I knew. Emails, transfers, a shared calendar with reminders that didn't match our life. Lucas' school meeting. Rachel, rent help. Doctor appointment. 5 years of quiet involvement. Photos too. Not romantic. Not explicit. Worse. Pictures of Daniel sitting on a park bench with a little boy on his shoulders, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Present. My stomach turned. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse. This was a second life, carefully folded and stored away while I lived inside a version of reality that had been edited for my comfort. When Daniel finally came home, it was dark. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the laptop open in front of me. He stopped when he saw it. His shoulders slumped, like he knew pretending was over. I was going to tell you, he said quietly. When? I asked. He didn't answer. I asked about the money, the visits, the photos. He admitted everything in pieces, like pulling out splinters one by one. He said Rachel had agreed to stay quiet, that my father thought it was best, that everyone was trying to protect me. Protect me from what? The truth? At some point, I realized I wasn't crying anymore. I felt hollow, strict. What else did my father know? I asked. Daniel hesitated. That was enough. He knew you still see them, I said. Daniel nodded once. That was the lowest point. Not the affair. Not the child. Not even the lies. It was realizing that the two men I trusted most had decided my life for me, together, and that whatever came next, I would have to face it alone. I didn't throw Daniel out that night. Not because I forgave him, I didn't, but because I needed time. Time to think without the noise of my anger drowning out everything else. He slept in the guest room. I slept in our bed, staring at the ceiling until morning, listening to the house settle, realizing it no longer felt like mine. By sunrise, something inside me had shifted. The shock had burned itself out, leaving behind something colder, clearer. I took the day off work. Daniel left early, saying he'd give me space. I didn't stop him. I needed the house quiet. I needed to hear my own thoughts without his explanations leaking into them. I started writing everything down. Dates, times, payments, conversations I could remember that hadn't made sense before. The night he'd worked late on our anniversary. The sudden weekend trips he'd insisted were mandatory. The excuses I'd accepted because I trusted him. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I was organizing. Around noon, I called Rachel. She answered on the second ring, surprised but not defensive. I asked if we could talk, not argue, not accuse, just talk. She agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Lucas wasn't with her. That felt intentional, respectful. Rachel didn't apologize. She didn't gloat either. She told me the truth as cleanly as she could. How she'd met Daniel, how he'd told her he was complicated but separated, how she'd found out too late that wasn't true. She admitted she'd stayed longer than she should have, for Lucas, for stability, for hope that Daniel would eventually choose one life instead of balancing two. I didn't come to the funeral to hurt you, she said. Your father told me you deserved to know. That secrets rot families from the inside. That sentence stayed with me. We talked for almost 2 hours. By the end, I understood something I hadn't expected to. Rachel wasn't my enemy. Daniel was. When I got home, I opened my father's letter again. This time, I read it slower, letting myself feel the anger instead of pushing it away. He had been wrong, deeply wrong, but he had also been dying. Afraid of leaving me alone. Afraid of breaking me. That didn't excuse him, but it explained him. By that evening, I knew what I needed to do. Not revenge in the dramatic sense. Not screaming or exposing anyone publicly. I wanted something quieter. Something final. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, then another with a financial advisor. I printed copies of everything I'd found, the emails, the transfers, the calendar entries. I moved money into an account Daniel didn't have access to. All legal. All documented. Daniel tried to talk to me that night. He cried. He said he'd been trapped. That he loved me. That he'd end things completely this time. I listened. Then I told him we'd be attending a memorial dinner the following week. A small gathering my father's old friends had planned. Something postponed because of the funeral chaos. I want you there, I said. We'll tell everyone together that we're working through things. Relief washed over his face. He nodded eagerly, grateful for what he thought was a second chance. What he didn't know was that I had already decided. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to expose the truth, carefully, cleanly, and in a way he couldn't talk his way out of. And once it was done, I would walk away with my dignity intact. For the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night. Because I finally had a plan. The memorial dinner was held in a private room at a quiet Italian restaurant my father loved. Long table, soft lighting, familiar faces, his old co-workers, a few family friends, people who had known him long enough to speak honestly. Daniel arrived beside me, confident again. Polite, controlled. He played the role well. He always had. I waited. After the main course, when wine glasses were half empty and conversation had slowed, I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice didn't shake. I want to say something about my father, I began. Everyone turned toward me. Daniel reached for my hand. I didn't take it. I talked about my dad's values, about honesty, responsibility, about how he believed secrets always come due. People nodded, listening. Then I changed direction. I also want to talk about marriage, I said, and the cost of living two lives. Daniel stiffened. I pulled out the envelope. Not my father's letter, copies of the records, bank transfers, calendar entries, dates. I learned recently, I continued, that my husband has a son, a 5-year-old boy named Lucas. The room went silent. Daniel stood abruptly. Emily. I raised my hand. I'm not finished. I explained everything. Calmly, clearly. I didn't embellish. I didn't insult him. I let the facts speak. I mentioned the woman, the child, the years of secrecy, and finally, the truth that landed hardest. My father knew, and he was wrong to keep it from me. Daniel's face collapsed. He looked around the table, searching for support. He found none. One of my father's friends spoke quietly. Is this true, son? Daniel nodded. Once. That was enough. I thanked everyone for listening. I apologized for the timing. Then I sat down. Daniel left without another word. I didn't follow. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone poured me more water. Someone else squeezed my shoulder. No one defended him. That was the justice. Not shouting. Not humiliation. Truth, placed carefully where it couldn't be ignored. And as I walked out of that restaurant alone, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weeks after the dinner passed in a strange, muted way. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just quiet. Like the world had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Daniel didn't fight the divorce. That surprised me more than anything else. He moved out within days, taking only what he needed. No arguments over furniture. No emotional appeals. He looked defeated, not angry, not vengeful, just tired. I think, for the first time, He understood that the version of himself he'd carefully maintained was gone for good. We spoke only when necessary, through lawyers, through brief, logistical texts. There were no late-night confessions, no apologies that asked for forgiveness. Whatever he had wanted to say, he had already waited too long to say it. The house felt different without him. Not emptier, clearer. I rearranged things slowly, packed away photos when I was ready, threw out what no longer made sense. Some nights were heavy. Grief has layers, and I was mourning more than one loss. My marriage, the man I thought my father was, the future I'd assumed was guaranteed. But the pain didn't consume me the way I'd feared. It softened. Rachel sent me a message once, thanking me for how I handled everything. I didn't reply right away. When I finally did, it was simple, kind, honest. There was no reason for bitterness anymore. Lucas stayed with his mother. Daniel became what he had always been, a part-time presence, no longer hidden. That wasn't my concern. It wasn't my responsibility. What surprised me most was how people reacted. Friends I thought would be uncomfortable were supportive. Some admitted they'd sensed something was off for years but hadn't known how to say it. My father's friends spoke about him more honestly now, his flaws alongside his strengths. It hurt, but it was real, and I needed real. I went back to work. I took long walks in the evenings. I learned how to sit with myself again, without distraction, without someone else's version of reality filling the space. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, I found a note my father had written years earlier. Nothing related to Daniel, nothing dramatic. Just a reminder he'd scribbled on a receipt. Trust the truth. It holds longer than comfort. I sat on the floor and cried then. Not from anger, from understanding. He had failed me in the end, but he had also taught me the very thing that allowed me to survive it. Life didn't snap back into place. It never does, but it moved forward. Slowly, honestly, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what I might find if I looked too closely at my own life, because there were no more secrets left to uncover. It's strange how endings don't announce themselves. They don't come with music or certainty or even relief most of the time. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days, until one morning you wake up and realize you're no longer carrying the weight you once thought was permanent. That's how it felt for me. Months passed. Life didn't become perfect, but it became honest. And honesty, I learned, is lighter than any lie, even the ones told with good intentions. I thought a lot about my father during that time, about the choices he made, about the silence he believed was protecting me. I don't hate him for it. I don't excuse it either. I hold both truths at once. He loved me, and he failed me. Both can exist without canceling each other out. That understanding changed how I look at people, including myself. For years, I had mistaken comfort for safety. I had believed that stability meant truth. I had trusted the version of my life that felt easiest to live in, rather than the one that asked me to look closely. I don't say that with shame anymore. I say it with compassion. We all do what we can with what we know at the time. Daniel is part of my past now. Not a villain. Not a lesson I need to keep revisiting. Just a reminder that love without honesty eventually collapses under its own weight. And Lucas, the little boy at the center of it all, taught me something too, without ever knowing it. The truth always belongs to those it affects. Hiding it doesn't protect them. It just delays the moment they have to rebuild. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Pay attention to the quiet discomfort. The moments that don't quite fit. They are often trying to tell you something important. And don't be afraid of the truth when it arrives, even if it comes at the worst possible moment. Especially then. Because the truth doesn't destroy lives. Silence does. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And if I've learned anything through all of this, it's this. A life built on truth may be harder to face, but it's the only one that will ever truly hold.